All right, so now let's address the Sam Harris controversy. Um, we seem to have caught the most out of context taken man in the internet age, and his collaborator, his sometime sidekick, Majid Nawaz, which I might be mispronouncing again, and I apologize. I'm not great with pronunciations. This we did a video uh, a couple of weeks ago that where we took a sound clip that was clipped by a guy named Sasha Sain, who is going around and kind of monitoring Sam Harris's podcast, and we took this clip of Harris basically questioning the value or of Muslims coming into Western societies, musing that maybe we should reduce that number. Uh, Harris hit back at us, said the video was a lie and taken out of context. Now, I went back, I re-listened to I listened to the whole show between him and Nawaz, Majid Nawaz. I listened to their entire dialogue, which is punishment enough, in my opinion, for having to deal with this topic. It was pretty laborious. And I talked with Sasha Sain about it. So what I want to do first is we're going to play the full as possible. Again, we can never be up to the Harris standard because, everything is context. We're going to play a longer clip. I want to say at the outset, I think that the way Sasha edited it, I appreciate his work. He's a very nice guy. He'll need, it was a sloppy edit. Although I actually am going to stand by the broader point, and we'll 100%.
But they look for that, right? Like that's the sort of thing they're looking for to defend themselves. They'd rather talk about how you can better situate the context than actually the content of the message.
Exactly. And this is someone, that's definitely Harris's game. And we'll get to some other examples of that later. But first, let's play this this much more full. Again, we can't, unlike Harris, presumably he'd probably like if we just uploaded his entire podcast. We can't play the entire thing, but we'll play the preceding statement, which makes clear that he's somewhat speaking in a hypothetical about this. We'll play Nawaz's response, Majid's response, and then a little bit of a bow from Harris, which is kind of interesting. All right, let's take a listen to this. This is about 4 minutes.
I would like to just, as a counterpoint to all of the hopeful noises you just made, I would like to just offer this. This is kind of a gut reaction that I know millions upon millions of people are having to things like what we just saw in Germany, the recent atrocity at the Christmas market, right? So you have a Tunisian immigrant who murders a truck driver and runs his truck into a crowd of people. And I think was it 12 who died in the end? I don't know if any.
About 50 injured, yeah.
Okay.
Roughly.
So you see something like this, and this is happening in the context of this wave of immigration coming into Europe largely by virtue of the war in Syria, although there are other reasons. And there's just the brute fact that 100% of jihadists are Muslim, right? These are not the Amish, they're not the Scientologists, they're not the Anglicans. If you take a community of Muslims from Syria or Iraq or any other country on earth and place them in the heart of Europe, you are importing, by definition, some percentage, however small, of radicalized people or people who will be prone to radicalism at some future date where they just decide to start watching too many Anwar al-Awlaki videos. It's just, this only happens to Muslims or people who are likely to become Muslim, right? So you see this massacre in the Christmas market, and I think many people will feel, what is the fucking point of having more Muslims in your society? It seems perfectly rational to say, we don't want any more. We have enough, right? And certainly increasing the percentage is not a help to anyone who loves freedom of speech and anything else, any of the other liberal values that you and I just spoke about maximizing. It's not worth the trouble. And if we can figure out some way to keep the number of Muslims down in any society, whether we're honest about this or whether we do this covertly, clearly it's rational to want to do this, and this is where someone like Robert Spencer would say amen. I would presume. Can you speak to that despair? And I mean, again, this is not an expression of xenophobia. This is an expression of the implication of statistics and the fact that it's only rational not to want to live in a world that looks more and more like Jerusalem at the height of the Intifada, right?
So, yes, a few points. First of all, it's not irrational. It's not even inhuman for people to react that way. I think that so take the political left, the very people that they're defending against the rising anti-immigrant sentiment, so the immigrants, if in their own countries also react that way when others come to their countries. It's a very human response. People like familiarity, people like a sense of predictability around their environment and the culture that they expect others to adhere to, because it provides that familiarity and predictability in engagements. It's a very human trait. And there's a danger that ideologues on the left are in denial about what is essentially a very human trait. Now, that doesn't mean, because it's a human trait, by the way, I believe genuinely that we evolved as human animals by being scared of that which we didn't know. Or as somebody, I suppose the populist anti-Islam lobby would say, actually, we're scared of something we do know, and we understand perfectly Islam and what it is, and that's why we're scared of it. But either way, point being, it's perfectly in tune and in harmony with our human evolution to be scared of that which isn't us, whether we know it to not be us or we're scared of it because we're ignorant of it. It's perfectly normal and natural. Now, ideologues...
But let me just say, that's true, and I think the left is too blind to that variable, but that's not at all what I'm expressing. I mean, so for instance, I am deeply multicultural in my affinities. If you tell me that there's a family from India that's going to move into my neighborhood tomorrow and open a great Indian restaurant within walking distance of my house, I will be ecstatic. That difference is all to the good. What I worry about is bad beliefs that are operative,
that's
right?
That's right.
And so that's the concern.
To the specific...
Okay, so to me, it sounds as if we've given you the biggest context we can. Majid goes on, and again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. He goes on to critique Angela Merkel's immigration policy, but call for paced immigration. And I should be clear that Sam Harris also opposes the Muslim ban. And if people found they misconstrued what I had said about that in the previous video, my point was that talking about this in lieu and in the policy context was not exactly a good area of focus. And I'll get to more of that in a moment. But let's just go over that clip. So yes, Sam Harris, in the lead up to the original clip, he's clearly using the some people think device. Now, Fox News uses this device. The president uses this device. But let's just take him at his word, which is that he is articulating the despair that he knows in his gut, I believe that was the phrase he used, that millions have, that will lead them to say after seeing a terrorist atrocity, what's the fucking point? And then he goes on and on and on. He lists more terrorist atrocities. And then he says, we're just talking statistically here. So I don't know if the position starts to shift at that point where he's talking about himself or he's still in hypothetical mode. I don't know. Then his interlocutor goes and basically has his sort of personal theory of apparently evolution and fear of other, and that helped us in a Darwinian sense. I don't know, okay, we're going off the rails a little bit. And then Harris actually redisciplines the conversation and says, okay, that might be true evolutionarily, but obviously our sort of inbuilt bias against the other should not justify policy. And if an Indian family showed up with a new restaurant, I'd be ecstatic because I have great multicultural affinities. But what I am concerned about, as far as I understand, and maybe Harris is using I in a different context and in a different way, and I'm taking him out of context, in which case I apologize. But as far as I understand, he said, I am worried about bad beliefs, situating himself back within the realm of someone who is quite concerned about Muslims generally, and certainly Islamic doctrine specifically. So, look, I wish that we had played this full clip before. There will be a note in the previous video to come to this video. And the other thing to be clear about is he's talking about Robert Spencer, not Richard Spencer. And Robert Spencer is a flamboyant and deranged anti-Muslim bigot. And most of the conversation between Harris and Nawaz is about the sort of perils of potentially, at least from Harris's perspective, the perils of potentially having a guy like Robert Spencer on his show because of just how bigoted he is, and Nawaz having issues with Spencer because, you know, he's quite literally, even by those standards, a bigot, and has conspiracy theories and alternative narratives about the genocide in Bosnia, as an example, which Majid Nawaz quite rightly has a problem with. So, but even in this example, and this is a good reason why we can be precise with all cuts and edits of that. There's no need to take out the preceding thought experiment or caveat, because this is Sam Harris's game. Sam Harris is still infamous for musing on the need for a nuclear first strike in the Muslim world. Now, in that same paragraph, he said it would be an unspeakable thing to do that would cause a massive loss of human life, but may in certain circumstances be necessary. Yeah.
Maybe you should just do it covertly, because that's another thing Harris was musing about, whether that's what some people might think after an event. Well, some people, I mean, like average Joe isn't like, we need to covertly take out Muslims. It's much more base than that. So who is that? Who is the people that Harris is referring to? It's mainly Sam Harris listeners.
Yeah,
that might have those
it's Sam
thoughts.
Harris cultist. And this is a few other things to get to, because in this sort of mode of discourse, then I'll make a few kind of broader points. This is quoting Harris now, because this is another thing Harris has written. Literally, the title of this column from Huffington Post in 2011, May 25th, 2011, is called "In Defense of Torture." I'm not going to get into the minutia of this sort of boring version of a scenario in 24, but just note this sort of rhetorical game here. I'm one of the few people who's argued in print that torture may be ethically an ethical necessity in our war on terror. In the aftermath of Abu Ghraib, this is not a comfortable position to have publicly adopted. There's no question that Abu Ghraib was a travesty, and there's no question that it has done our country lasting harm. Indeed, the Abu Ghraib scandal may be one of the costliest foreign blunders to occur in the last century, given the degree to which it simultaneously inflamed the Muslim world and eroded the sympathies of our democratic allies. Now, he goes on, though, to say that many people who've written to oppose torture do so from an emotional place, and there might be specific scenarios where this is necessary. Now, of course, he has no solid foundation in international law and how we establish norms of sort of basic international upkeep of norms and standards, which is actually quite an important part of this supposedly more kind of progressive world that we should be moving towards, according to Harris. Now, this guy, Mark Sullivan, wrote a piece a couple years ago in Counterpunch called Sam Harris's Quantum Universe: How to Say One Thing While Meaning Another. And he took a couple of quotes from a podcast that Harris did with a rather extreme figure, Douglas Murray, from November 22nd, 2015. Just notice the pattern. This is back during the Republican primary when Trump had proposed the Muslim ban, registry, and other candidates were trying to race to catch up with him. And again, be aware with Trump where right-wing thought experiments can actually lead to policy. But here's Harris. Harris: there are many strange and silly declarations both on the right and the left relating to this crisis. He's speaking about immigration, Islam, Syria, and all the rest. And what's especially distressing is that the demagoguery has been coming from both sides. We've had Donald Trump and Ben Carson and Ted Cruz say things like, and then it's truncated. I think Trump said that there should be a registry for all Muslims and we should start closing mosques and we shouldn't let any Syrian refugees in. Cruz said we should only let in only Christians. Okay, I agree. Crazy things to say. Now back to Mark Sullivan. And yet, 1 minute and 31 seconds later, Harris seems to have changed his mind. Perhaps Cruz isn't so bad after all. Back to Harris. Is it crazy To express, as Ted Cruz did, a preference for Christians over Muslims in this process? Of course not. What percentage of Christians will be jihadists or want to live under Sharia law? 0. If we know that some percentage of Muslims will be jihadists, if we know that we cannot be perfect in filtering, then we know the larger percentage will be committed to resisting assimilation to our society. And then to know that a given refugee or family of a refugee is Christian is a wealth of information, and quite positive information in this context. So is it mere bigotry or mere xenophobia to express that preference? And of course, the question mark. Now back to this. I hope you understand. I'm not expressing sympathy at all with Ted Cruz's politics or with Ted Cruz. And now Sullivan. And yet, and Harris, is it unhelpful to treat him, though he actually is a religious maniac, like a bigot in this point? This is a quite reasonable concern to voice. And the fact that we have a president who will not even name the problem is giving the right enormous energy, and we really don't want to have that here. So I read that just to show that Sam Harris is, for a guy who constantly whines, is a sort of strategically disingenuous person who is constantly giving himself escape routes and different ways of coding or evading or not actually strictly standing by the implications of what he's saying. And for good reason. I understand that Sam Harris opposes the Muslim ban. I have no idea how anybody could read and take seriously his musings on Islam and not support a Muslim ban. That would be the logical conclusion, in my view, of reading and taking anything he says seriously. In that clip, when Majid Nawaz started addressing Angela Merkel specifically, he blamed the left, of which apparently Angela Merkel is now a member of, for inflaming the right by supporting open borders and refugees. Now, this is the old chestnut that we hear all the time, which is that apparently there's a secret horde of voters who are really left and secular and moderate and progressive, but they migrate over to vote for dangerous, bigoted neo-fascists from Europe and the United States because liberal Democrats and centrist Democrats like Barack Obama have not been sufficiently anti-Muslim enough. So in other words, having actual policies, whether it be drone strikes in Yemen, of which I have many problems with, or serious aerial bombardments of ISIS, overseeing extensive spying programs, counter-surveillance programs, which continued through the Obama administration. But apparently because one goes out and gives speeches where they say that a group of homicidal maniacs are not the perfect representatives of over 1 billion people. And yes, maybe mouth some platitudes which don't get to the nuances of different strains of Islamic thinking. Not that I've ever heard Sam Harris ever do anything remotely approaching that in his life. That apparently that empowers or motivates otherwise potential moderate and reasonable voters to switch over and vote for people like Trump. This line of thinking is so ludicrous, and it's belied, in fact, by the latest results in the UK, where Jeremy Corbyn, running a robustly left campaign, which in some ways, for me, frankly, you might have played at times, he might even have been stronger rhetorically on terrorism, for my taste, to be frank with you. But what he did do was correctly blame U.S. foreign policy, where it has been an inflammatory and abusive and imperialist practice. And he also got into the realm of actual politics, which is that if you're concerned about the spread of Islamic fanaticism and Wahhabism specifically, because that's what actually we're talking about, then you have to question the government's connection in the UK and, frankly, our government and everywhere else with the government of Saudi Arabia. Jeremy Corbyn scored a great victory, of course, primarily for economics and austerity, but there wasn't the I am a probable labor supporter, but Jeremy Corbyn isn't making sweeping and dumb and hysterical statements about Islam, so I can't vote for him voter. In fact, as I've seen from Sam Harris, who has rightly opposed Trump pretty much every step of the way, some of his audience is shocked that he's not followed his own natural conclusions. So maybe there are a couple of people in a small subgroup of new atheists who switch over to vote for neo-fascists because they don't hear enough anti-Muslim bigotry from mainstream Democratic and labor politicians. Look, It's really simple. There is a very easy answers to these questions, not in terms of implementing policy-wise, but as an intellectual framework. Foreign policy matters, culture, context, and history matters, and ideology matters. If you're primarily concerned about ideology, you don't look to Islam as one thing. You certainly don't look to your own reading of the Hadith and the Quran, especially if you don't even speak Arabic and have no training in this area, as a one-size-fits-all answer to this. You can focus on the role of funding a very specific and virulent strain by certain members of the Gulf states who happen to have very close relationships with Western governments. These are complicated issues. They're important issues. And even if you're not doing it intentionally, if you're out promoting hysterical, ahistorical, pseudo-intellectual views about this, you are at the very least the unwitting handmaiden of some incredibly dangerous and cruel policies that are happening right now in the United States and across the globe. We've played it in fuller context. I am sure that there will be new rounds of bitching and whining from Harris and from Nawaz, but I hope anybody who takes these things at all seriously and would like to do a little bit of work besides listening to a couple of podcasts will get in, do some actual reading, do some actual research, because these areas actually are quite important and they demand that.
Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos